We have a really great session prepared for this lunch hour. We are going to be talking about mastering the contact center evaluation. So whether you are a customer, a partner, a vendor, understanding the right questions to ask, the right processes to follow, making sure that you are thoroughly prepared to perform a contact center evaluation to make sure that you're choosing the right technology for your organization. So I have here a panel of experts from Vonage who are prepared to talk about their experiences as collectively they have helped hundreds of customers choose the right contact center platform. My name is Laura Colon, and I lead sales here at Vonage in the West. I've been at Vonage for 9 years, and luckily enough, I had the opportunity to sit next to our contact center at Vonage for 3 years. So those of you that have managed a call center or a contact center know that it's very important to blend properly people, processes, and technology in the call center in order to run it effectively, to also achieve your goals as an organization. To your customers, the contact center is typically perceived as the voice of your organization. So we all feel it's very important to have the right contact center partner in order to serve your employees and your customers. So I want to dive in. I'm going to start with some introductions of the folks on stage. I'm going to let them introduce themselves. So Siobhan, why don't you introduce yourself to everyone here?
Hello, I'm Siobhan Latisse. I head up solutions engineering at Vonage globally. I've been with the company for 11 years, lots of roles, both pre-sale and post-sale. So I've worked with lots of our customers to implement their solution, to build out call flows, to help them with reporting, ultimately helping them deliver on the outcomes that they were trying to achieve when they first engaged with us and purchased our solution. So lots of exposure to agents, supervisors, team leaders, and what's really important to them.
Thank you, Siobhan. Mark?
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for being here. Mark Bailey. I am a sales executive, been with Vonage for 5 years, and really focus on the pre-sales evaluation, aligning those objectives and requirements, and ultimately implementing these solutions that lasting business partnerships.
And Joe.
Hello, everybody. I am Joe Schofield. I'm a senior solutions architect rolling up to Siobhan. I actually joined the company about 3.5 years ago from a customer. So previously I was the IS application manager in charge of our Salesforce ecosystem, was responsible for anything that interfaced with Salesforce. So I actually got to go through the process of evaluation, implementation, and long-term care and feeding of telco, specifically designed to interface with Salesforce.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you for those introductions. All right. So let's start with preparing for a contact center evaluation and defining what success is. Mark, what should companies be thinking about as it relates to objectives and outcomes for their contact center?
Absolutely. I think you hit the nail on the head. The focus should be what are the outcomes you are looking to achieve. We find this is a much more valuable approach than focusing on specific feature functionality to drive the evaluation. Really understanding what it is from the top down business objectives, while also keeping in mind the impact that it's going to have from the agent level, the supervisors, the administrators. So gathering inputs around the current process and those affected by it will help you understand the opportunity areas that you have, align those with your business objectives, and then ultimately get to that wonderful feature functionality that we see all throughout the room here on it. For example, if there's an objective to improve the agent performance, some requirements and features you're going to want to focus on with the vendors you're evaluating is quality management. How can we look at these calls, improve performance, and improve coaching metrics? Alternatively, looking at how we can support that agent while they're in call, enabling them with the information they need to have an effective outcome, ultimately reducing metrics like cost to serve. And then lastly, please, share what's unique about your organization. We understand that call centers can be perceived a certain way, and there's a lot of standard functionality associated with that. However, really understanding what those outcomes are that you're looking to achieve and aligning those appropriately, and then sharing any unique aspects of your business with the vendors you're talking to.
Thank you. So Siobhan, we heard a lot about outcomes, objectives. How can organizations make sure that they are planning to get an ROI or return on investment for their contact center?
Sure. Just quickly before I answer that, I'd add to Mark's point about telling us what's unique about you. A really great practical technique for doing that is a reverse demo, right? Show us what you're doing today. There might be things that you really like about it and things that you really don't like about it. So help us understand what that really looks like for you today so that we can help figure out how to improve it for you. The more information you give us, the better, right? We're going to help advise you and guide you. And then on to talking about ROI, I think I'm a massive believer in the fact that projects do not get approved based on features and functionality. I even know that from our business when we're looking at different tools, right? So, to avoid that horrible situation where you've gone through a process and you've really been invested in a particular vendor and a particular tool, and actually then it gets quashed and you end up doing nothing, really think about the ROI. And that comes from what your goals are, right? If you're trying to improve customer experience, if you're trying to improve the agent experience, great. What does that actually deliver for your business? And that might be hard to get to, because if you don't have a lot of data today, or you don't have ways to measure those things, how do you even know what the uplift is going to be? So I think sometimes it's worth looking at what I would call proxy measures. So if you can't measure customer experience today, that's something you want to start doing. Think about measuring how many complaints you get, because actually reducing customer complaints by proxy would mean that you've improved customer experience. Or reducing agent attrition would by proxy mean that you've improved the agent experience. If you're lucky enough to be able to measure things like average handle time, first call resolution, net promoter score, sales effectiveness, if you've got an outbound use case, then great. Think about what an uplift in productivity or time savings would deliver for you. And then if you're presenting this internally to a board or a CFO, go a little bit conservative, right? The last thing you want to do is be questioned by saying, hey, click to dial is going to generate $3 million in revenue, and the CFO goes, yeah, sure. So try and be conservative and realistic. That's something we can absolutely help with, and I'm sure most vendors would help with. Obviously, if you're looking at something on a risk mitigation side of things, you can state that value, that ROI, because you're either going to, take on that risk or you're not.
Perfect. So just remember, features are not going to get your project approved. Make sure you are measuring your outcomes. Joe, how can organizations plan for timeline and process in the evaluation?
Yeah, absolutely. So nothing derails a project like trying to get through legal, right? Or trying to go through an approvals process that isn't clearly defined and understood. What a lot of organizations try to do is look at when they need to sunset or sign a new contract, because what they have in place today either needs to be phased out, is going to end of life, or a contract ends. Building backwards from that, you need to be able to clearly articulate when a project needs to start, what the time horizons need to be for each of the checkpoints to make sure that a project can go live on time. And a lot of times that can be put at risk through not understanding internal purchasing processes and what is needed to get to signature for a new partner. We recommend definitely getting legal involved early, understanding exactly what that process is, building a timeline together for a mutual close plan. What are those time horizons? When do we need to have documents prepared and ready? And then that ultimately drives towards when do we need to have pitch decks in place for executive alignment, understanding what those ROIs and KPIs that we need to deliver are, and how to effectively communicate that value up the chain to ensure a timeliness of execution to ensure that we actually deliver the project on time and in scope.
Yeah. I can't tell you how many times we've met with a client who doesn't know when their contract ends. So certainly ask. Also, you want to ask internally what your process is, especially if you're new to the organization or you haven't done a project like this before, because it's very often that we're told this is the process, and then the customer learns that that's not the process. So make sure you're asking internally, what is our process? Asking multiple different ways, you get different answers every time. And then planning to hit that timeline, whatever that timeline may be. It may be a contract, it may be a busy season, but keep those things in mind.
Well, and I would say another important piece in the timeline aspect is user acceptance testing, right? Actually planning time for your teams to be available to test the systems appropriately and make sure that that then feeds back into the project timeline. We get a long way into these projects sometimes and then get held up because resources aren't available. That pushes delivery date out, which ultimately causes heartburn across the board. So making sure that you're properly planning for internal resource time during project implementation is another key aspect of it.
Yeah, that's really important, actually, the resources. Planning to have the right people in the room in those conversations. Phone system, contact center, it touches a lot of the organization. And as I said earlier, that's perceived as the voice of your organization. So making sure that you understand the players that are affected by the change of the solution and making sure you're asking them what they need, what's important, what KPIs are they trying to drive, what are the outcomes they're trying to accomplish. It shouldn't just be an IT evaluation. It should be making sure that everyone affected by the change has an opportunity to give you the information that you need. So, questions. Everyone who knows me knows I love to ask questions. But in all reality, you should be asking the vendors questions too, right? The vendors are going to ask you a ton of questions through the process, but what questions should you be asking the vendors? So, Mark, what are some process questions that should be asked to the potential vendor?
Absolutely. I think to the points Joe and yourself made earlier, understanding your internal processes is very important, but also understanding the vendors that you're evaluating, what their processes are. So from a pre-sales perspective, understanding timelines, understanding key milestones. It could be discovery sessions, reverse demonstrations like Siobhan had mentioned, platform demonstrations, proof of concept. So understanding the resources required for that and the timelines associated is very important, ultimately working backwards from that activation timeline. But once we get there, right, the evaluation is over, now what? You really need to focus on and understand from these vendors what that implementation process looks like. Who are the resources that are going to be assigned to your project? Are they in-house resources? Is there a third party involved? Asking to interview those resources that will be a part of that project and ultimately implementing the solution is very important. Understanding if there's a culture fit that helps you flush out any gaps throughout the implementation, which ultimately, is going to be critical in ensuring the success of the solution long term. And then lastly, what does that day 2 support look like? Similar, talk track and questioning to what you would ask the professional services organization. What would you ask of customer success? Will I have an account manager? Will I have a customer success team? What resources are available for me for self-service, technical support? All of those things are very critical in understanding so that there are no surprises ultimately after that go live.
Yeah, you should have the opportunity to meet with the folks that are going to be supporting you after the sale. A lot of the time, the salesperson does go away after the initial implementation. So making sure that you know some of the key players on their end is important. And if you can't get those folks on the phone, what does that really tell you about the support you're going to get post-sale? If you can't even get them on the phone pre-sale, I'd be a little wary of that. Joe, compliance and security questions. This is a hot topic.
Yeah, absolutely. So where we see a lot of companies get tripped up is multinational deliverability, right? Working with a partner that understands delivering contact centers throughout the globe, working within regulations inside like India or China, for example, and understands what is viable and what is legal in each of those situations is immensely important. Understanding what security and compliance certifications they have, right? PCI DSS compliance, HIPAA compliance, SOC 2, all of these pieces are important. And if you have a security and compliance team on staff, they're going to want to have those questions to the potential partner early so that we can get those answered and off the table quickly. It's then really a matter of ensuring alignment in where agents and customers are located. Once we've done that, we can ensure that we have the appropriate teams engaged to understand any local regulations that we need to take into account during the design phase and ultimately writing of the SOW and contracts.
Yeah, a lot of customers are now asking us to fill out security questionnaires, making sure that we have the right compliances and security in place. If you're not doing that, you should be. If the vendor can't fill it out, we were talking to a customer the other day who said that the vendor wouldn't fill it out for them. So again, I'd be a little wary if they're not willing to fill out your security and compliance questions. Siobhan, we hear that vendors say a lot of things, but how can organizations prove what the vendor is telling them?
Yeah, so I think that if you are talking to many different vendors, you're going to want to ask questions about how they can genuinely showcase and give you the confidence that the solution does what they say it can do. Now, everybody's mind goes to demo when, we say proof, and demos are great, right? All that demo discovery, the reverse demos, every piece of information you've given them is going to go into a demo. And if they're a decent vendor, they're going to be really specific to your use cases. They're going to mirror your terminology. It's going to look really, really good. However, you don't know how much time and effort has gone into the background of building that. How much is smoke and mirrors? What's really sitting underneath the hood? And of course, if this is integrating contact center into Salesforce, their Salesforce instance that they've used to demo to you is probably very, very different to your Salesforce instance. You might have things that are very specific to your company, to your industry. You've probably spent a lot of money with an SI to customize your Salesforce instance. So I think ask questions about what can be done beyond the demo. And there's a couple of different things that can be done. So I think the first one, which is quite low effort for you as a company, is a demo discovery or a deep dive into the demo. So rather than just having them kind of present and do all the nice corporate slide deck and here's some demo scenarios, you can really sit with them in a workshop style meeting and really get deep into, show me under the covers, show me how you did that, show me what it looks like to configure that. And that can be fairly low effort for you. It's not low effort for them, but it can be fairly low effort for you. If you want to go beyond that, then something like a proof of concept is a really good idea. But do bear in mind that proof of concepts extend your timeline. So Joe talked overall about timelines. Have you built a proof of concept process into your timeline? You might be wanting to do that with multiple vendors. How long is that going to take? And of course, you have internal resources that you're going to have to provide and align to a proof of concept. Proof of concepts can be really, really useful if you've been burned in the past with perhaps integration issues or maybe even call quality issues. So it's useful to think about the things that you're actually going to be testing and what that proof ultimately looks like at the end. What does success look like? And then the final thing is customer references, right? Any vendor worth their salt should be able to get you in touch with a customer who has a similar use case to you, a similar, location set, a similar industry. So that's really the proof of the outcome, right? That's not just, yeah, click-to-dial works, or yeah, we've got good call quality. That is genuinely like the proof of the outcome of working with that vendor. It's the culmination of product, implementation, and post-sales support. Did the outcomes actually come to fruition?
So as it relates to references, one of my new recommendations is ask for a reference of someone who has been recently implemented. Why? A lot of vendors are cutting their internal resources and outsourcing those professional services teams. So it's important that you make sure you talk to a customer who has installed recently so that you know the experience that they went through and the types of teams that they had during that implementation. Landmines. So we hear a lot from organizations that they just changed their platform 3 years ago, but they didn't think of XYZ or they didn't expect XYZ. What are some of the landmines that organizations should avoid? Let's start with you, Joe. I can give you a little more context.
Yeah.
Often we see customers go down the rabbit hole or get stuck in the mud during an evaluation.
Yeah, so one of the major landmines that customers tend to do is they spend a lot of time early on in the process window shopping, right? So they'll go to a company and say, hey, show me the art of the possible. What aren't we doing? What that negates or downplays is the company's ability to deliver core functionality, right? So looking at things like uptime, looking at things like call quality, the ability to deliver that high audio quality regardless of where your customers or agents are located. Those pieces are core functionality, and a lot of companies sweep poor performance under the rug by flashing up a lot of new features and functions and great looking UIs. Now, all of that window dressing is important. It can drive a lot of value to the company overall, but ensuring that the base platform does what it says or purports to do is the number one box that you have to check with a lot of these evaluations. We definitely enjoy showing all the cool whiz-bang features and capabilities that augment and produce a great overall value to the company. But what the foundation of that is our ability to deliver that call quality regardless of where it's at.
Something that was said to me recently regarding window shopping that just cracked me up is, how many of you actually use like picture-in-picture on your TV? Not many, right? It's a feature, it's a functionality, it's cool, but you don't really use it. So making sure that when you're going through this evaluation, you may see cool features, functionality, but what's the use case? And what's the reality that you're actually going to be using those feature functionalities? Make sure you're focused on the outcomes, not the features, because we see people go with a partner because they have these really cool features, but then they never use it and they actually can't do as well what another vendor can do better. That's more important to the organization. So the picture-in-picture thing was funny.
Well, and that's a great point. Mark talked earlier about understanding what your key objectives for the project is. it's very easy to get derailed by these window shopping exercises and go, oh, this is a really cool new feature, and it takes you completely off base. So that's a good point, Laura.
So I want to keep moving only because the next topic is something I think we're all passionate about making sure that you get right. And Siobhan was talking about it earlier, was POCs. So I want to start with defining the different methods of doing a proof of concept. So typically we'll hear smoke test, we'll hear a pilot, or we'll hear a proof of concept. And so first defining it, I think, is important to make sure that you're going down the right path on a proof of concept. So will you define like a smoke test, a pilot, a POC?
Yeah, absolutely. So smoke tests are really about kind of what Siobhan was discussing earlier, where it's that really deep dive into a demo, understanding exactly what's being shown, how it was built, and seeing that in real time versus a presentation. So having those deep conversations about what is being shown and how to achieve those outcomes. Proof of concept is really about getting login access and poking around, having agents dialed in, doing those types of things. Typically, a proof of concept is going to be in a vendor-owned Salesforce org and a vendor-owned asset. And it's really about testing deliverability and base functionality. The last one really is about pilots. And pilots oftentimes are paid for and can be effectively the MVP or the first phase of a greater project. Typically, we're going to recommend, if you're looking to go pilot with somebody, with a partner or a vendor, you're going to want to be down to your final selection or even your final 2 selections if you're going to go that route. Again, these can significantly increase the timeline, so building that into your internal processes and timelines is vitally important. The big difference between a POC and a pilot is really the environment that we're in. We will build this out inside of your Salesforce instance. So to Siobhan's point earlier, every Salesforce instance is different. Each has its own unique challenges, and being able to display functionality, deliver live calls, and prove out all of those capabilities and training is really what the goal of a pilot is. So in the one hand, it's proving that it's not just smoke and mirrors, hence the smoke test. One is proving deliverability and functionality inside of a controlled instance. The other is, how does this integrate with your specific instance of Salesforce and the other tools and systems that you are employing? Each of them increases the capabilities, increases the level of effort, both on the partner side and the onus on your internal resources. So again, when we talk about ensuring that you have the appropriate time and resources allocated, this becomes crucial to determining which of those testing methods needs to be employed to still meet your timelines and engagement criteria.
Here's my recommendation, and you heard Joe say it probably 10 times. It takes a lot of time. POCs, pilots, the whole thing, it's intense. And it puts a lot of work on the people testing, right, at your organization. My recommendation is start with the vendor that you want to go with. Start with your top choice. Because if they meet the success criteria, move forward with them. However, have a backup. What happens if they fail, right? That's when you go to the second vendor. We do see customers who do multiple POCs at one time, and it typically results in a lot of confusion internally on their end with their testers because it's a lot on them. Siobhan, how do you prepare for a successful POC?
Yeah, very good question. I think Joe kind of finished on it, right, in terms of criteria. I think you have to have really well-defined success criteria. If you're going to make these resources available for testing, you need to make sure that you know what success looks like at the end of it. So if it is just testing call quality, great, good call quality, checkbox done, success met. If it's can it integrate into our Salesforce org, great, checkbox met. But if it's more than that and it's more about outcomes, like, is this genuinely going to give me an uplift in terms of outbound calls made? Or is this genuinely going to save me time on the inbound side of things with average handle time? That's obviously a little bit more intense to test for, and a little bit more difficult to measure and say, check, we did it. So I think really well-defined success criteria, realistic success criteria is the best thing to start with. And then as you go through the testing, I think you have to really be prepared to engage in both change management and risk management. So regardless of the level of testing that you're doing, is it a POC, is it a pilot, you're going to have people getting into something that they're unfamiliar with. This is a new tool. It's not what they're used to. It's a slightly different UI. It's a slightly different click path. And people kind of have to understand that that's normal. That's what change brings. And I think that not preparing testers and the folks engaged for those changes can derail a proof of concept, because actually they get stuck in the weeds. They get stuck in the detail of, oh, well, it's different to what we're doing today. And that's kind of where it ends, right? Different doesn't necessarily mean worse, particularly if you're driving towards an outcome at the end of this. So you have to be really active in that change management, and then really active in the risk management. Like, what could go wrong if we're integrating into your Salesforce org? There could be things that we can't foresee. There could be teething issues. Of course, any good vendor is going to work through those with you, but it's not going to be perfect from day one, just like you wouldn't expect a full implementation to be perfect from day one, right? There are cycles of QA testing and business user acceptance testing that you go through. A POC or a pilot can be no different. So I think just be really active and prepared to be active in that change and risk management.
And I think we've talked a lot about the process, right? But you brought up a really good point, Siobhan, about the people involved. There can oftentimes be too many cooks in the kitchen, right, during a pre-sales evaluation. Really designating leaders across the respective business units for sales, service, IT, operations, and making them the champions to work with their teams, understand what they're trying to accomplish, and then communicate that to the providers that you are working with to ultimately make sure that everybody is heard, but we're not getting too far into the weeds and delaying things further by having too many inputs can be a problem at times.
And then the only other thing I would add is Mark and I, when we first started working together, had a POC go really, really bad. We didn't close the deal, I'll tell you that. And the reason why is because they had no game plan. They had no plan for testing. So we set these users up and no one even touched it. We would look at the usage and they didn't use it. So now when we run POCs, which we do very successfully now, is we set up a process and we require that we all get on the line together, we do the testing together. We'll give it to them to go play with on their own, but it's important that we make sure that they're going to test it. Otherwise, the users just don't. I mean, we're all really busy, so you just can't expect people that have full-time jobs to also now spend time playing with a system that they just might not get to doing it. So Mark, we talked a lot about outcomes, objectives, but at the end of the day, there are features that are pretty important as it relates to a contact center. Can you talk to us about features that are important as it relates to like connecting the whole organization?
Sure, yeah. Obviously, driving force, like you mentioned, Laura, contact centers are the voice of your organization to your customer base. Focusing on that is critical. However, understanding the full application landscape, how all of your tools are leveraged for interoperability of communicating both internally as well as externally is also becoming more and more important in the contact center and communications in general. For example, if you have a very high, ratio of calls that are getting transferred from the contact center to a subject matter expert that wouldn't necessarily be defined as a contact center agent, what does that process look like? Is that seamless? process? Is it a 10-digit transfer? Alternatively, are you sharing access to the presence across the organization? So we're seeing more and more drive for a holistic effort when it comes to supporting customers, including the contact center, but also the different systems and processes that you might leverage, such as a Slack or a Microsoft Teams, and tying all of those pieces in ultimately to deliver a great customer experience.
So thank you, Mark. This one's really important. If you have Salesforce, you have a contact center, what are some of the technical features, Joe, that people should be looking for as it relates to Salesforce integration?
Well, I think the first thing to latch on to there is the word integration. Not all integrations are created equal. What Vonage strives for in particular is a fully embedded experience rather than just a purely integrated one. Now with that, you have everything from what Service Cloud Voice offers, real-time transcriptions, which is underpinned by things like call quality. Speed and accuracy of real-time transcription is entirely dependent on the quality of that audio, and that ultimately feeds into that speed and accuracy. Basic things like call queuing and queued callbacks, screen pops of the records into Salesforce all starts to help drive towards agent efficiency and delivering the experience that you want for your inbound callers. Anything from natural language processor, offloading some of that call center traffic to a voice bot that can do self-service, right? So I think there's a lot of capabilities and features out there on the market. I think, as I stated before, it's important to understand what you're attempting to accomplish, making sure that your partner can deliver on those base capabilities, and then really understand where you're heading in the future and whether or not your partner can scale and grow with you.
Thank you, Joe. The biggest issue I hear when I'm talking to an organization who's looking at a new contact center platform is that they don't have the right data. Siobhan, can you talk to us about reporting and what people should be looking for as it relates to reporting with Salesforce integration?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, as Joe kind of stated, integrations are not created equal. And the data is going to be the thing that really underpins understanding if your project has been successful and if you have driven those outcomes that you wanted, right? The decrease in average handle time, the increase in first call resolution, increase in net promoter score. So if that data isn't readily available at your fingertips, you're going to be in a situation where you're trying to marry together contact center data and Salesforce customer data, and actually have you really moved any further forward in terms of making sense of it and being able to make operational and business decisions for the future, strategic decisions, if you still have to do that. So I think looking at the amount of data that's pushed into Salesforce by your vendor, as well as the data points that are included, is really, really important. You don't want to be restricted. You don't want to go and try and run a report and realize, oh, but I don't have that one particular thing that I'm like really, really interested in. So I think really diving down into what is available to me, and not just taking it for granted that it'll be there and that you can just run reports and dashboards later, like that'll come after. I would really pay attention to what is available to you and go for the most data pushed in that you possibly can. You might not use it all, but you might need it in the future at some point.
Totally. Here's another recommendation from a feature perspective that's personally, I think, very important. If you're using Salesforce digital channels, their chat, their SMS, it's important to ask your potential vendor how they route those channels. Because ultimately, you may end up managing two different routing engines that don't talk to each other. So it's very important to ask your potential partner how they route and report on the different channels that you're already using with Salesforce, because a lot of partners have their own stuff, right? We have our own channels, but we'll route Salesforce channels. Ask your potential partner how they route those channels. Anything you would add on that, Joe?
Yeah, absolutely. Really what Laura's alluding to there is having a single place for skills-based routing, understanding how those interactions are going to be delivered to an agent. Is that the same agent for a chat? Is that the same agent for an SMS as it would be for a call, or other different routing rules that you want to employ? The other big component to that is capacity planning. Understanding what percent of total agent capacity a particular engagement will consume, and then being able to effectively route other engagements based off of that information. The last component of that is really about maximizing ROI in the investments you're already making. If that functionality comes standard with your Salesforce instance and you're already leveraging it, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to pay another provider to provide the same exact service when there are partners out there that can effectively and efficiently route those channels today and provide that seamless experience.
Thank you. So we could all sit up here all day and talk about contact center evaluations because we're all very passionate about it. That's why we're here. So let's do a quick recap. So Mark, why don't you just recap some ways that are important that organizations prepare to do a contact center evaluation?
Absolutely. And when we think about contact centers, right, it's that balance, that delicate balance of customer experience and efficiency. So understanding out of the gates what you are looking to accomplish with those business outcomes should be driven by data. What is my net promoter score? What is my cost to serve? That's a service example. What is my speed to lead, right? How long is it taking me to funnel these leads to the point of an opportunity and ultimately a sale as a sales example? So understanding and working with a partner that is able to help you get to a point of getting that data in the right place and allowing you to have the quantifiable metrics to make those informed decisions around what it is that those outcomes you are looking to achieve.
You said something about a partner, and I felt it was really important to say something about that. If you have a Salesforce implementation partner, an SI, pull them into the conversation, pull them into the room. If you're doing a technical integration into Salesforce and you've got a partner for that, they should be involved in that conversation. Siobhan, things to focus on and maybe not focus on during a contact center evaluation.
Yep, so in summary, I would say focus on your own business outcomes, focus on your people, focus on the stakeholders that are going to be involved. Like you said, there are other people outside of perhaps your org or your organization that are going to be affected. So really map out those processes and stakeholders initially. Don't miss people out, and don't go down the rabbit hole of some of the flashier, distracting features that might not ultimately deliver the value that you're looking for.
Absolutely. This is the one I tripped you up on, so you get this one. It wasn't intentional. Landmines. Can you recap some of the landmines that people should avoid during a contact center evaluation?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, to Siobhan's point, understand what functionality is important to your business, understand where you want to go in the future, and then ultimately drive towards the value that you're looking to extract out of the relationship.
Perfect. I'm going to open it up. Anybody have any questions? Any questions from the audience? And Laura's got a mic if anyone does.
It's a question to the panel. How often do you help shape the KPIs with the customers based on the new innovative capabilities that you bring to the table that they're not aware of? We're not talking about functional features, but more of improving the business processes and KPIs that never thought of.
Yeah, so we actually engage in something called a business process review quite often, and it's just that exact use case that you described, right? They might not know the improvements that they could make to those KPIs. They might not know the things that they should be focusing on to articulate that ROI, and particularly if there are newer features and functionality out there, I'm thinking generative AI, I'm thinking real-time transcription, they're not going to know off the top of their head really what improvements that could give them. So we will sit down, we'll do time and motion studies with agents, we will sit and interview team leaders, supervisors, anybody in the organization that's going to be relevant to this evaluation, and we'll come back and help them put that together into a cost versus benefit analysis and ROI, however it is that they want to present that internally. Now, of course, we can help them present it, but it's for them to take internally and really champion and take to the board and take to the steering committee. It's an intensive consultancy process, but we will do that for them for free to help them really solidify their project and avoid that kind of awful do nothing, oh, your project's been deprioritized against, something else somewhere else in the organization.
I think one of the really awesome pieces about that as well, not only that it's included with the services from our customer success organization, but it's a holistic view. It's not just through the lens of telephony. It's not just through the lens of Salesforce. It's what is your technology stack? Where are there duplicate efforts? Where are there deficiencies based off of your future vision, what you were trying to accomplish? And then they take that holistic view and build a roadmap that they then employ and make check-ins and do all of those things to help organizations march towards their objectives. So it's really providing that landscape of what's there today, what processes are in place, and making recommendations on how to improve that over the long term.
Thank you
Yeah,
for
I
the
think
question.
it's a great question too, because that is one of the number one things that customers, come to us for, right? Is they don't have the data in Salesforce. They struggle with marrying that activity with what's actually going on in the processes and with their customers. So ultimately, that business process review, like Siobhan had mentioned, is an involved process, but it ultimately gets us to that point of having that baseline that we can build off of and ultimately get more quantifiable data for meaningful process improvements and insights.
I'll add one small thing, which is you should tell the potential vendor just your challenges as an organization in general, because there are some times that people don't bring things up because they don't think it's relevant to a contact center, but the reality is it might be relevant. So we were talking to an organization who was having challenges with fraud. So they're like a shipping company, and people were stealing the loads that they were shipping out. And because they call in, like anyone can, it's a public phone number, anyone can call in. And anyway, long story short is we were able to do something pretty cool with our API platform in order to see, first of all, like, where's that phone number coming from? Is it a landline? Is it a mobile? Is it a VoIP phone? Who's the carrier? So we were able to deliver that information to them before they actually picked up the call. And then there's other things we can do, like voice biometrics and things like that, to make sure that we're validating who's calling. So anyway, the contact center people didn't bring that up at all. It was actually the head of their security, their CISO, and it was just general conversation, and we dug in and we were able to come up with a pretty cool solution for them. There's another question.
Anyone? Do you have a question? Hang on.
Hello, team. I talked to a gentleman here at Dreamforce. He said he had a contact center solution that wasn't ideal, but he stuck with it because he was afraid of the onboarding experience being a nightmare. How does Vonage differentiate the onboarding experience, especially with somebody who's coming from a less than stellar platform?
Yeah, I think it really starts with the solution engineering team and understanding what their challenges and problems are. Through the pre-sales process, we actually build out a scope of work which clearly defines and articulates what it is we're solving for and what our proposed solution is. Once we pass that off to our professional services team, they're actually going to lead a solution design workshop, which can be multiple days, can be very intensive, but is ultimately designed to fully solution out and understand exactly what needs to be done and the implementation, so not only design, but also responsible parties. This can help clearly articulate who from the customer side needs to be involved, what amount of time they need to spend and allocate towards that, and all of that is clearly defined. Throughout the build process, testing, implementation, and go live, there are multiple checkpoints and sign-offs that the customer needs to do to ensure that the project is delivering the functionality and the capabilities that they ultimately need to make this project successful.
Regardless of your partner, make sure they're giving you a scope of work of what they've promised in the sales process. I can't tell you how many times we hear that they promised me X, Y, and Z, get it on paper.
Yeah, and I would add to that, like the value of the implementation process is something to think about and recognize. We know that a lot of vendors will kind of just, brush past it and say, hey, we'll do you like a quick start, we'll just get you up and running really quickly. It's not going to cost you too much up front, and that can be quite attractive. But what's that really going to deliver for you, right? You've spent this whole process thinking about what am I trying to achieve? What am I going to get out of this? I'm ripping out something else and I'm putting in something new. I'm going to disrupt lots of people and go through all this change management. But what if their templated quick start isn't actually delivering for you, what you need? So I think that the approach that we take and the time that we spend pre-sale on that statement of work is a massive differentiator. A lot of people will not do that without you paying them for consultancy efforts. And it's quite unusual for a company to do that pre-sale, not ask for money for blueprinting to then go off into the implementation. So I think placing a high value on that and not just thinking of it as an upfront cost that doesn't do anything for you is really important.
Thank you. Any other questions before we wrap up here?
One more.
It's a simplistic question, but how often do you get a proper RFP or RFI with well-defined objectives?
I'll let you guys take that.
I think the kicker there is well-defined objectives, right? 90% of the RFPs we respond to is feature, right? It's somebody going on or working with a channel partner and just going down a checklist of functionality that seems interesting or seems cool. What that's missing a lot of times is context, right? What are those business objectives that we're actually solving for? And the reason that becomes really important is a particular feature may or may not deliver the objective at all. And so disqualifying a potential partner because they don't have a feature line item doesn't mean they can't deliver the objective through another means. So I think it's really important when you're evaluating partners to define your objectives first and then understand what features and functionality can deliver that function or deliver that objective.
And I think it's important as well to be cognizant of who you are releasing that RFP to, right? There's a lot of tools out there. There's a lot of industry insights that you can find. One of the premier ones that our customers find Vonage on, for example, is the Salesforce App Exchange. So releasing an RFP to 20 different potential candidates is going to get you the response that you're after, very broad and not really drilling into those objectives that you're looking to accomplish. So a great place to start and who you're going to introduce to the process would be the App Exchange. And then we'd always encourage having a conversation either before release of the RFP or during the process at some point, so there is some additional contacts that can be gathered that you're not going to get on paper.
That App Exchange piece is critical. I don't think people realize when it comes to contact center, you should read those reviews.
One more, if I may. How often do you get SIs engaged?
Do we get what engaged?
SI, system integrators engaged. Given that typically, generally speaking, clients see Vonage as a technology provider versus a strategy and business process shaping or defining?
Yeah, so there's a couple of different ways that SIs get involved. We have lots of SIs who we partner with, who can, bring us business. That's great, but also who want to implement our solution. So they will go through our certification process, and again, they're very much aware of the Vonage solution and can spot potential opportunities for us or things where they think actually Vonage could add a huge amount of value to this customer as they're, going through their processes and building out something much broader but very strategic for their customers. So that's great. The SIs already know about us. They're, kind of working together with us. And then I think there are times where, we will come across a prospect who has an SI who we've never spoken to before. But actually, that's a great thing for us, right? It's great to work with them. It's great to educate them. It's great to bring them on board and potentially put them through the implementation certification process if they are interested in doing so and they haven't done so already. So it's very common for us to work with an SI in some capacity.
Yeah, one of the first questions I like to ask when it's a Salesforce customer evaluating a contact center is, who implemented Salesforce? Who manages Salesforce? Maybe two different people. A lot of the time we hear, unfortunately, sad stories that the initial implementation didn't go well with that SI partner or whatever it may be. So I like to understand who implemented it because it'd be good to know. And then I also want to know who's managing it because they should be in the room, honestly. Any other questions? Okay. Thank you all for the engagement. Thank you for the questions. We really appreciate it. And good luck. Good luck out there.